Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is my second installment of my VP tutorials. This is lesson 2. Alright, let's jump right into it. So lesson 2. In lesson 2 I'm going to cover ifs and loops. I'm going to talk about VB operators. I'm going to talk about if statements. I'm going to talk about the for loop. I'm going to talk about the while loop. I'm going to talk about the do loop. And I'll talk about comments in your programs and how you comment in VB. So let's move on. So this is operators. This is logic operators, and I'm comparing it to the algebraic operators and the VB operators. So as you can see, there's really not that big of a difference from it, except for less than does not equal. You use these two symbols to make it say that, and this kind of makes sense. Greater equals, less than equals, less than equals over here. Kind of makes sense. Really simple. If you're confused on it, I guess just write it down, or you can look it up or pause the video if you need to reference this. But just felt you need to be aware about that. So let's move on. Let's talk about the if statement. I just pulled this image off of Google and figured it was a good way to explain how the if statement works. So if statement's pretty much you have a condition and then it kind of like checks. You can check if it's true or false. So let's say our score is greater than 60, so it's true. So comment equals not so bad, and it moves on and moves on through the flow of logic. And then if score is less than 60, it flags false and it says this comment is terrible and moves on. That's pretty much how if statement works. So let's move on to the other statements. Alright, yet again, pull this image off of Google. Felt was a quick way to explain how these two work. Here's the do loop and here's the while loop. So pretty much the difference between the do loop and the while loop is this idea of pre-condition and pre-test condition and post-test condition. The do loop is the post-test condition, meaning that it just runs whatever and then checks to see if the loop is correct and do the loop work. Pretend that's better grammar. So it checks if the loop's going to work, and then it runs back and it continues to do this until it flags no and moves on. The while loop, on the other hand, it checks if the condition works at the very beginning, and if it says yes, then it just continues to loop until it says no and moves on. That's how these work. Then let's move on. The for loop. For loop's a little bit more complicated, but it's still pretty easy. So this is how this works. So in a for loop, we're going to have like a value initialized, and we're going to set a limit for it. In this case, in this example, we have an initialization of our variable I equal to 1. We have a limit of as long as I is less than 10, then this case is true, and it's going to run an increment. So I'll run through it real quick. So it's going to run is I less than 10. This is true. And it's going to do something, and it's going to run back, and it's going to increment. You can set it to increment or decrement. In our case, we're incrementing, so it's just going to continue to run until this condition is false, and then it's going to just come out here and end. And that's how the for loop works. And this is kind of how these loops work. If you need to figure out how they work, or if I'm going too fast, feel free to pause the video and kind of examine it and run through these loops yourself, or go Google search them. So let's move on to the coding part. Alright, so if you're wondering if I was going to get to comments, yes I am. Here is comments, and this is how you comment in Visual Basic. So as you can see, you use this symbol right here to comment, and what you want to do is you want to put it in front of whatever you're writing. Why you want to comment in Visual Basic or really any language is because it helps other programmers, and it also helps yourself. Say you have a really big program and you can't remember what every little bit does. It's good to put a comment so that way you can quickly read it and figure out what's going on or what you're doing. Or if your code's a little weird, you can put comments so that way someone else can take a look at it and figure out what's going on relatively easy. Also, there's no, I guess, real guidelines on how to comment. I mean, unless you're working somewhere or doing something that has specific guidelines. But as a general, I guess you should comment your declarations, your initializations, and kind of put a little comment for each statement. You don't have to go overboard with it. Less is more, or I should say, more appropriate comments is better. So this is kind of a little my 2 cents on how to comment. So let's get into this. So let's talk about what we're going to do. So as you can see, I kind of set up here to keep us on track. so you know exactly what's coming up and what we're going to work on. So keeping with this, let's start talking about the if statement. So let's see, for demonstration purposes of comments, let's see, so declarations, so we're going to say, we're going to create some little value, dim sum val has integer, and then for the sake of just demonstrating comments, I'll show you what I mean by commenting for your initialization. So we'll just initialize it here. So sum val equals 0. There we go. And for space, we'll have a little comment for statements. So look, we have if statement right here. So we'll just say, so we'll talk about the if statement. So yeah, how you write if statement in Visual Basic is pretty simple. You just write if, you write your condition. So if sum val, and we'll say if sum val is equal to 0. We know that's true. We know 0 is equal to 0. So then we write the word then, and then you can press enter or you can write underneath it. I'm just going to press enter for the sake of time. Look at that, VB writes it. So if, and we'll write our statement. So console dot write line. We'll say true, because we know this condition is true. And I'll put a little thing up there so that way we can see what's going on. So you'll see what I mean. I was going to write a bunch of things. Alright, so let's run this and you will see. And as you can see, we know that 0 is equal to 0, so this prompts true. So let's talk about other characteristics of if statements in Visual Basic. So in Visual Basic we have, and in most programming languages, we have something called an else statement. What an else statement is just this little thing that says else, and it means if your condition is not true, then it just moves to this. So we'll say false. So now we're going to change the val to 1, and we know that 1 is not equal to 0, so it's just going to skip this, and it's going to move down to here and print out false in the terminal. So as you can see, you don't need to put an end else or anything like that. It just knows, it's all highlighted, so it knows that it's just part of this initial if statement. So now we know that we set a sum val to 1. We know that 1 is not equal to 0. So let's run it and you'll see it should print out false. Or it will. Yep, false. Alright, here we go. Now let's move on to the if else. So if else works just like the if statement, except you can put it within the you can put it within the if statement. So if else, oh my gosh, else if, we'll just write else if, and we'll write sum val equals 1, then, and this will fix itself in alignment. We'll write console, we'll write true, because we know that is a correct case. So let's run this and you'll see that it prints out true. So for our if statement, we know that val equals 1, so that's why this prints out true on the console, as you can see. So if statement, we know that, I'll take it slow for you, we know that we've set it to 1. We know that if sum val equals 0, then we know that's not true, so it moves down to here, and it checks if some value equals 1, sum val does equal 1, so then we print out true, and we move on, because this else condition is not met. Alright, so let's move on. I'm setting back sum val to 0, just for demonstration purposes, that's all. Just move on. So let's talk about the while loop. While loop's pretty cool, so it's also really easy to do in Visual Basic. So you would just write the word while, and then you would create some condition. So while sum val, we'll say, I don't know, is less than equal to 10, and then enter. And if you notice, just like the if statement, you press enter, it writes your end while, or you can write end while yourself. It doesn't really matter. So while sum val is less than while sum val is less than 10, we're going to increment it. So we'll say some val is less than 10. Yeah, here's what we'll do. Do two things, so make it easy. And we'll put this here. Okay, as you can see, this is going to print out, and we're going to increment this. So how you increment in Visual Basic is you would just write sum val plus equals 1, or you can put whatever number, or you can use common sense. How you would decrement is you would put that. But anyway, we want increment in our case. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to run it, and you're going to see it's going to print out a certain number of times. I want you to guess how many times it's going to print out. As you can see, it runs for 10 times, but if you notice, it prints out 11. Why does it print out 11? Because we have a base of 0. It starts at 0. When you increment, it doesn't actually, for the first run, it doesn't actually set it to, it doesn't actually set it to 1. I just thought that's interesting to know. So, yeah. For future reference, if you're ever wondering, if you're ever doing a loop and you're like, oh, why isn't it like printing out the right number of times, or why isn't it running the right number of times? Because it's at a base of 0. So that'd be something useful to know. But anyway, let's move on. So let's, for the sake of purposes, redefine our val right here. So I'll show you another example with commenting. So we can comment on the side. And you can see that you can comment on the side of any line of code, but you cannot comment in front because it just turns it all into one big comment. So I just thought that'd be something interesting to let you know. So let's move on. Let's talk about the do loop. So in our do loop, we have two types of do loops in Visual Basic. The first do loop is do loop until. I'll show you what the until part means. So, and we'll steal some little lines up here, make it quicker on us. And here's what we want to do. We would want to steal more code. And it's going to increment, and it's going to increment until this condition is met. So sum, we're going to increment until sum val equals 10. We'll just say 10. And you're going to see it increment outward on the console, and as you can see, it prints out the correct number of times now. Now, why is that? Because it stops at 10. It doesn't actually do the 10th condition, so to speak. So in other words, it would run 10 times. It's not while this condition, it's until this condition is met, and then it stops. That's the idea with the statement until. And as you can imagine, the do a while would work very much like a while loop, but with this kind of line of logic. So and you would kind of even write it like a while loop. So do while is less than or equal to 10, and yeah, that's what we'll say. And there you go. You'd write something like that, and we'll still increment it, and we still need to reinitialize because by the time it runs through, it's going to not be 0 anymore. So just write sum val equals 0 for the sake of explaining. So, oh, yeah, do loop until, do loop while. And now you'll see it'll print out 10 times. Here's why. Like I said, make it easier on the eyes. There you go. So as you can see, the do while loop will do the same thing as our while loop did. Also, I guess I should note that the reason why it's running 11 times is because I set it to less than or equal to 10, but if I change it back to less than 10, or change it to less than 10, you'll see it'll just run 9 times, or 10 times. Just something I want to point out to you. Alright, so let's move on to, we already covered do while, we already covered that, so let's move on to the for loop, the last part of this lesson. So for loop's pretty simple and Visual Basic. Here's how you would write one. So for, in general kind of like computer terms or programming terms, we use I in for loops. So for has integer, we'll say equals 0, and we'll set it to run for 10 times. And if you hit enter, just like the rest of these, it just prints out the bottom, or you can write next. And next kind of just means it's the end of the for loop, or it moves on to the next part of code, or it's just easy way to think about it. And yeah, you can also, I guess, yeah, you could use you could use some val if you'd like, or you can. I just want to demonstrate you can just write its own little integer. You can write your own variable in the for loop. Was all I wanted to demonstrate. And I'll come back to this example to show you. See, we basically set our variable to something, and we create a limit. Our limit in VB is 10 over here, and we were going to increment it. If you notice, there's no increment statement in this for loop, but has a default in Visual Basic. For loops always increment by 1, and you can of course change that, but I'll just show you it incrementing on its own with the default setting. So and we'll display I, don't need to do anything else, and you'll see, bloody hell, I forgot the header again. Here we go, and you'll see it prints out 10 times, or in our case 11, because it starts at a base of 0. And I'll show you how to change it from the default step of 1, or literally you just write the word, get that, step, and then you can change it. So in our case, I'll just say 2 to show you. And you notice now it's going to count by 2, so 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 is how many times it's going to count for, or if you really want, which is kind of redundant, you can write 1. And still, you'll see it counts by 1. So, well, what have we learned in this video? Alright, we've learned how to write comments, we've learned how to write if statements, we've learned how to do the else if, else, we've learned how to do a while loop, we've learned how to initialize, and we've also learned how to do a do loop, and we've learned how to do both cases, the until, and we've learned how to do the do while. And we've also learned how to do the for statement. And I hope that you've learned something from this video. I hope it was helpful to you in a way. And if you stay tuned to the third video, I'm going to combine all the ideas that we learned from this video and the last one, and we're going to create a calculator in the console. And it'll be pretty cool. And yeah, so check out the third lesson, and see you then. Bye.